I mean, 10 out of 10 for predicting that it might be Rishi Sunak who brought up the nutrient whatever. But we probably missed nutrient neutrality. We probably missed a trick on Daniel Khalif in our pre-match warm-up.
That's true. We should have done, or I should have done. But I suppose in a way, the truth is that what Starmer was doing, and look, he's doing this week after week, and I don't think it's going to change much up until the election. It's rinse and repeat. Is that he mentioned about 3 or 4 things, and that's the point. The sort of macro Labour strategy is to basically say week after week that nothing is working, and really pinpoint or really put Sunak on the spot in the sense that of trying to make him seem like that Jim Callaghan thing in the late 70s. Crisis, what crisis? Yeah. Never said it, but he was perceived to have said it. It was a famous Sun headline. And it is very difficult for Sunak to answer because clearly, and his aides will know this, and those thinking, the Conservative strategists will know this, all the opinion polls say, focus groups say, voters are deeply dissatisfied with the way the country is going, the direction it's heading in, the quality of their everyday lives and lived experience. There is this sense entirely, which is not just a sense, it is in so many ways borne out by events that so much isn't working properly. And how does Sunak respond to that? Because on the one hand, if he can't accept it,
well, you're getting it also for people who are lucky enough not to stumble across this stuff. You're getting it from people like Sarah Vine in the Daily Mail,
totally.
Michael Gove's ex-wife,
it's
describing everything as broken in the country.
It's an elite narrative as much as it is a narrative on the street. And how does Sunak respond to that? He can't accept the premise of the question, obviously, because he might as well pack up and go home if he accepts it's all gone. But And therefore, he has to try and say, well, things aren't really that bad, but obviously leaves open to the rejoinder, which is, you're out of touch. You haven't got a clue. Very, very difficult for him to get off that one. And I think in terms of what Starmer was trying to do strategically more generally, telling as well that thinking of the topics he was talking about, yes, criminal justice, China, small boats, these are all things which aren't just sort of Labour bread and butter. It's not NHS, it's not schools. It's deep into Tory territory and stuff as well. The twin benefit is stuff around which Sunak has a political problem with his own backbenchers. And he's got restive backbenchers on China, on small boats, on security. And of course, we saw, and I suspect we'll hear it again, this new name that Starmer has got. It used to be that Johnson was the one who managed to very effectively apply the kind of little nicknames for Starmer. Starmer turning it on, Sunak calling him inaction man.
That's good.
I'm sure it's been focus group with Initiative It's Live. It sort of works, it sort of lands, and sort of, again, plays into this sense of kind of atrophy and stasis that Labour is trying to create. So I suspect we'll hear about that again in weeks to come.
It is, and we've talked about this before, it is usually a mark of Sunak floundering when he where he breaks the glass to release the Jeremy Corbyn comment, isn't it? Yeah. That came quite early today. I think that came in the 4th question.
Yeah. Well, we spoke last week about the fact that, and nothing has changed, to coin a phrase, that Sunak is a politician in search of a message, in search of a narrative, in search of some adhesive to bind his thoughts together. You need that as a politician, as a prime minister. You need a message to be able to tell about yourself and about your opponent. What is Sunak's? We know what Starmer's is. It's very effective. It's pretty effective. It speaks, it chimes with a certain feeling in the country at the moment. Sunak desperately needs one of his own. What he cannot do is rely on the greatest hits of Conservative narratives and messages gone by. And we saw them again in display there. And as you say, James, it is the break glass in case of emergency. Oh, I'm struggling. What can I do?
Yes.
I'll mention Jeremy Corbyn.
That wouldn't be planned in advance. That's more likely to be a kind of,
there's the big three. There's and to some extent, Conservative leaders always talk about
Captain Hindsight last week.
Captain Hindsight, talking about lockdowns. This all stuff that feels like ancient history to most people. It doesn't feel like it rises to the moment that we're in. So, talking about union paymasters, okay, Tory leaders always do that, fine. Talking about Corbyn, a pillar of the 2019 election result, he's not going to be relevant by the time of the next general election. He's not even a Labour candidate anymore, whether you think that's good or bad. It's just not a relevant issue. And then also just talking about, we had heard it in the first question there, around criminal justice. Oh, well, prison escapees were 10 times higher under the last Labour government. Last Labour government came in 1997. It's not much saying, oh, well, okay, but back in 1998, things were a bit worse. 1998, you're talking about 25 years ago. A good slice of the electorate wasn't even born or certainly wasn't voting. So, those three things are not going to go anywhere near to cut the mustard for him in terms of a message which lands and which resonates, and they are still in search of one.
Well, what would that look like, though? Because, I mean, you can see them almost sort of poking at some of the old, as you say, some of the old things that work. The Daily Mail often provide a bit of an indication of where they could go. So they've gone on the old unions lines since Angela Rayner's speech yesterday. But the support for industrial action is historically high.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were Rishi Sunak lying in bed at night, what are you actually dreaming of?
I think that they will, all roads lead to a general election which is very vituperative, very nasty, which is sort of odd in a way because you've got two principals who kind of by their inclination and by their nature aren't necessarily the sort of politicians you might imagine would create that.
No.
But I think circumstances will force Sunak, because he has little to say about himself and about the government's record really, not least because his particular version of the government hasn't been in or won't have been in for that long. We will probably see a series of sort of pretty fierce assault on Starmer, his record as DPP and so on, and that will be matched by the Labour Party and Sunak. It's not going to be asymmetric. We saw that in the run-up to the local election campaign, some pretty choice language being used on digital communications and so on from the Labour Party. So I think that in the end we are heading down a direction which is going to be about character. And it is going to be about, I mean, I think obviously probably the most effective, and again we know this from focus groups, the most effective message against Starmer really is one of vacillation.
Yes.
And the idea that he's not being straight with you and he's not being honest with you and he wasn't with his party and he's not going to be in the future. I think that is the one, because Starmer we know is not especially popular among the public. You don't necessarily have to be to win, by the way. Margaret Thatcher was never popular, 1979, 1983, 1987, but she still won. We know that the public is receptive to the idea of his being vacillating, of his being someone who isn't necessarily straightforward. But again, the question is whether that matters very much.
Yeah.
Whether just the fact that, you've got 75% of the country, including plurality of Conservative voters at the moment, who don't think the country is going in the right direction. And the country is in need of a change.
And here's your only option.
And that is the only option. Very, very hard in those circumstances.
Well, it's the only option in England, of course, because we should say a few words about Stephen Flynn, who is good. He's a good operator.
He's a good operator.
Inbox
He's a good
reflects a lot of admiration for him. And also, something that perhaps Blackford didn't do much was to go with one barrel aimed at the Tories and the other barrel aimed at Labour. Yeah,
and you see that again and again. Look, I think there's a very interesting contrast, right, which we're going to get a sort of sneak preview of in terms of the different political situations in England versus Scotland, in the sense that it feels increasingly, you can never say for certain, long way to go in the grand scheme of things to the next general election, but it feels as if the Tories are down and out. The SNP, by contrast, as an opponent for Labour, are down, but they're not out. Yeah. They're still very much in the game. They're still sort of neck and neck now with the Labour Party in terms of Westminster intention. That's a big recovery for the Labour Party. I mean, the Labour Party was all but moribund just a short time ago, but they're not out. They still pose a threat. And obviously the Rutherglen by-election will give, which is very soon now, will give a really interesting indicator. If Labour can't take that in the circumstances of the by-election, everything that's happened with Sturgeon and so on, then it really puts a big question mark as to how big a recovery there can be in Scotland, which makes for Labour, which makes the task in England all the harder and all the steeper for Starmer.